Hello, everybody. This is reviewing for your part 2 of your final exam in fall of 2022. This is the multiple choice review. Now, I'm going to go through this extremely fast, so if you need to kind of slow down the YouTube playback speed, then go ahead and feel free to. All right, so first question, we're going to be simplifying an expression, and you just have to remember what you're doing here. So you're going to distribute all the terms that are in front of the parentheses sets carefully. So 4x minus 28. And then we have a minus 15x. Careful here, it's a negative 3 times negative 6, so it's a positive 18. The other thing to remember is you are not solving this, you are simplifying the expression. So when it comes to simplifying, you're just going to basically smush your like terms together. So positive 4 minus 15 is negative 11x. And then you're going to do the same thing with your constants. So negative 28 plus 18 is a negative 10. So final answer that you would select, and it will be a multiple choice question, is negative 11x minus 10. Beware of distracting answers because, you know, if you make a silly mistake, I probably put it on as a choice. All right, this next question, the dreaded LCM question, but there is a trick. You look at your denominators, 2, 5, 2, 5, and you think of a least common multiple that will knock out both a 2 and a 5. So you can really figure out any common multiple, but the least common multiple for 2 and 5 is literally 10, which is just multiplying them together. So that trick will always work to find a common multiple if you're not sure if you're working with the least common multiple. So what you're going to do next is, I know a lot of you like to do this next step in your head. Totally fine, just be careful. But you know, the rest of us are going to type it in the calculator. So you're typing literally what you see. So 10 times 3 over 2. And when you type that in the calculator, you get a 15. And then you keep distributing. So 10 times 3 over 5x would be 6x. And then 10 times 9 over 2 would be a 45. And then 10 times 4x over 5 would be an 8x. So now we have an equation, different than the first question. We have an equation that we're going to be solving. So you want to bring all your x's to one side and constants to the opposite side. So it really doesn't matter which direction you go, but I know you guys like to keep your variable terms positive, so I'm going to bring the x's to the right side this time, which means I'm going to have to move my constants opposite to the left side. And slow is the name of the game. You don't want to make silly mistakes because you're going too fast. So showing your work naturally slows you down, and it also stops you from doing goofy things. So negative 30 equals 2x. One more step and we're home free. Going to divide both sides by 2. And in this question, you do get a solution of x equals negative 15. Now, with the gridded response bubbles here, this is pulled from an SAT test. So this is not what your final exam will look like necessarily. But on the SAT test, you notice there's no negative option. So if this was an SAT question, I'd be like, oh man, I screwed up because it's negative. So I would go back and revisit my problem. But it won't be tricky like that on your final exam. So we did do it right. We're just not going to be able to practice bubbling that in. All right, this next question we're solving again, and it is a cross product. It's a proportion. So you are going to multiply the diagonals together. So 4 times x plus 4 equals, and then do the other cross product, 3 times x minus 2. And then notice I haven't done the distribution yet, simply because that's a very common mistake. Kids forget to distribute all the way, so I'm intentionally going a little slower than I normally would on this question because I don't want to make a whoops. So here we go. That becomes a 4x plus 16 equals 3x minus 6. Oh, and I didn't make this disclaimer at the beginning of the video. As always, there's a good chance I'm going to make a mistake somewhere in this video. I'm sure it's there. If you're not sure if I made a mistake, just ask. So simplifying this equation, you're going to end up with 1x equals negative 22. Again, I wouldn't be able to bubble it in on an SAT-style gridded response, but we did do this question correctly. So next question, they want me to isolate for a particular variable. In this case, they want me to isolate for y. So when I'm moving terms around an equation, it works just like solving an equation. I just got to be careful who can combine and who can't. So you generally want to move any addition or subtraction over first. So we're going to go ahead and add the 8 to the other side. And this is what I'm talking about. So while the 8's do cancel, you still have a 6y equals, now over here on the right hand side, 14x plus 8. I can't combine those because they're not like terms, so I'm going to have to write literally 14x plus 8. So then my final step in general for these isolation problems is always to divide. On the test itself, you can make this big divide by, you know, whatever the number is, and that's the end of your problem. On this particular question though, you'll notice that the 14 and the 8 and the 6 can all be reduced. So if you looked at the answer key, you're going to see something like 7x plus 4 all over 3. That's much more challenging than what you're going to see on your final. There's no reduction step on the final exam because it's going to be a set of terms that doesn't reduce. Now you guys nailed the word problem question on the post test. This is a little different, but I think with this being multiple choice, you're going to be just fine. So you're going to have a rental car company that has a flat rental fee. So this guy right here, this $57, is flat, meaning that there's no variable on it. But then you are charged 55 cents for each mile driven. So that guy right there is a variable cost. So it's going to depend on how many miles you drive. They want us to, we would, on a multiple choice test, choose the best answer, but the total cost is C. And we find that by taking our flat cost of $57 and then adding to that our variable cost, which is 55 cents, 0.55, and then times how many miles I drive. And it says right here, M miles. So you're going to be looking carefully through the choices for something that is equivalent to that expression there. Some of you asked when you were doing this review, did it matter what order? And the answer is no. You just got to make sure you're using the right variables in the right spot. Now this question should be nice. It says, what is the slope? Well, this is in slope-intercept form. So when it's in slope-intercept form, the slope is just going to be the coefficient of your x value. So again, we have a case of, whoops, we won't be able to bubble this in because there's no negative option. But trust me when I tell you on the test, it's designed in a way where it's pretty obvious how you bubble it in. All right, the system. You had a substitution system on your post-test, but on your next part of your final exam, you're going to have something that looks like this. While you could use substitution, I wouldn't recommend it. It does say to find the value of y, which means I'm going to use elimination because of the way it's set up, and I'm going to want to eliminate the x's. So if I think about, okay, what am I going to need to do to knock these x's out? I'm going to use that neat trick you guys came up with earlier in the year where we just multiply by each other's numbers. So this one by a 5 and this one by a 2, but they need to have opposite signs. So one of these has to be negative. I'm going to make the 2 negative just because I feel like it. So what happens now is you have a brand new system. It is 10x plus 35y equals, I can do math, hold on, 110. And then negative 10x minus 10y equals negative 10. And when I go to add this new system together, which is equivalent to the original system, the x's are gone, and we end up with 25y equals 100. And then divide both sides by 25. And what I really like about this question, I mean, it's gridded response, so you'll kind of know by the nature of our bubbles on the test if you did it okay. But it's like, you don't have to finish it. Like, you just have to find y. Now, if you were unfortunate enough that you, solved for x, I'm just going to put a 4 there. On the SAT, you can put them like literally in any bubbles, so that looks good to me. It'll be more obvious on the test itself for the final exam. I don't give you a lot of bubble options, so like on that one, if it's a 1-digit answer like that, I only give you 1-digit bubbles. Oh man, you guys killed this one on the post test. 9 vans, 12 buses, 546 students. So it'll be multiple choice, and I apparently had no creativity when I wrote this question because I just use V and B to represent the number of students on a van and the number of students on a bus. So that would be our first equation I'd be looking for. And then for the second school, they have a similar equation, but obviously with different numbers. So I just, it's multiple choice, guys. So don't do what I do and read too fast and pick the wrong one just because you're reading too fast. Make sure you take careful consideration into looking at the right answer. So we're going to set up 2 problems anytime we have an absolute, or sorry, not an absolute, but yes, an absolute value equation. This is not an inequality like an and or an or. This is just an equation, but you still are going to set up 2 problems. So that stuff inside the absolute value bars, the 4x minus 8, it could be equal to 32, but it could also be equal to negative 32, because remember, absolute value bars, like you do the math and then you make it positive, quote at the end of it. It's distance from 0. So you're going to be solving 2 different equations, and because the solutions are different at the get-go, you're going to get 2 different solutions. So 4x equals 40 is this one, meaning x equals 10. And then over here, the math kind of looks the same as far as how you're going to solve for x. But again, the solution started off differently, so you're going to have a different solution. So 4x equals, I can do math, negative 24. And then divide both sides by 4, and you get x equals negative 6. Again, multiple choice question. So the way it'll probably be written on your test is in these fancy set brackets. that, indicate here's my solution set. So you would be looking for an answer that kind of resembles that. Remembering that we have to set up 2 problems. I can guarantee you that there's probably a choice where you only solve 1 problem, and then that's obviously not right. So here, on this example, we have a decision to make. Do we have an and or an or? And because this original problem is a greater than, that means we have an or. And it does want the interval solution for this question, right? So when you set up your 2 problems, the first one, you just take the bars off. Oops. Copy. Hello. Negative 16. No, 16. Or 2x minus, oh my gosh, quit. 2x plus 6. For the second problem, you flip 2 things for me. You reverse the sign, and then you negate that 16. Man, I need to take a mental break today. So we're going to solve these, and you're going to take it all the way down to the interval solution, okay? So after you solve this, let's see, I'm going to kind of go fast here, which is probably dangerous. So x is greater than or equal to 5, or x is, now here I don't reverse the sign again because I'm dividing by a positive 2. I know the solution endpoint is negative, but the coefficient's not negative. So anything less than or equal to negative 11 or anything greater than or equal to 5. So for most of us, having a graph helps us figure this out. So less than or equal to negative 11 would be yonder, and greater than or equal to 5 would be yonder. So the interval solution would be from negative infinity to negative 11, oops, union, 5 to infinity. Now that was for an or question, but I'm here to tell you a little secret. The one on your test is an and, so it's like absolute value and then a less than or equal to. So remember, when you graph an and you solve it first before you graph it, you're going to have, possibly, I don't know if it's inequality with equal to or not, but you're going to have a point, and then the numbers in between. Remember, ands are sandwich questions. So, spoiler alert, it's an and on the test. It might have brackets. I won't swear it's parentheses. I can't remember off the top of my head. And frankly, you can figure it out. You guys are smart. Right now here, which is equivalent, that's just a fancy way of saying simplify. So we're going to take this second power and we're going to distribute it, and we're not going to forget to distribute to the coefficient as well. So 3 to the second power, we're going to realize that's a 9, so it's going to be one of these choices. And then when we have x squared squared, and then we have y to the 6th squared, the rule for exponents is that you multiply them together. Okay, and that's an exponent rule, not a coefficient rule. So 2 times 2 would be x to the 4th. And then y to the 6th squared would be y to the 12th. So this guy. You'll notice, look how sneaky, Mr. Hardy wrote this. Look how sneaky he is. He wrote y to the 8th because a lot of kids think they're supposed to add these together. It's a very common mistake. Ooh, he was tricky. I bet we were that tricky on the test too. All right, so is this a function? And in order to determine if it's a function, you have to look at all the x values. Every x can only be paired up with one y value. Uh-oh, right here, there's a problem. So right here, x equals 3. X equals 3 is paired with 5, and it's also paired with negative 1. So x equals 3 is a problem, meaning this is not a function, so you're going to circle no. Yeah. When you see a choice like that, what happened is, and I did this when I wrote your test too, I think, I just couldn't come up with another answer choice, so I put something stupid. Don't pick that one. All right, so the domain of the function. The domain would be all of your x values. We know when we have a graphed function, we look from left to right, but this is like a listed function. So we need to look at all the x values as form of a list, not an interval. So they're going to be in set notation like this, 0, 2, and negative 2. Generally, we put them in increasing order, but you're not going to have 2 answers where they're in different orders. That wouldn't make sense. Now here we have a continuous function that has a question about range. So range, remember, are all your y values. This particular example, because it's continuous and not just a listing of points, you're going to have to give me an interval for range. So you kind of mark off the high to low to high, I guess I should say, because remember, range has to go low to high. So the bottom y value starts at 0, and the top one is, I'm guessing, 6, because I can't count, but I notice all the choices go to 6. Make sure you choose that exact order. I might have been tricky on the test where I put something backwards. It has to go low to high. Okay, word of warning on that. Ooh, transformations. So when you have a +1 inside by the x, and absolute value bars are synonymous with parentheses. They're grouping symbols in math. So there's always that built-in negative. So we know x moves horizontally, but we have to remember about the built-in negative. So think opposites if that's the way you want to remember it. So moving horizontally with an x +1 really means left one. Now notice, there's no choice here that says right one. Mr. Hardy was very nice to you on that question. If I was writing this, I probably would have been nasty and put a right one. Some things to remember when I reflect over the x-axis, you would see something like this, a negative in front of the absolute value. And then if I was to shift down one, that would look like this, y equals absolute value of x, and then subtract 1 off to the side. No transformation would just be the parent function, y equals absolute value of x, which it's not that. So it wasn't either one of these. So it's left one, which again, you have a graphing calculator. So if you're really stuck, you can just graph it. Similarly here, if you're not sure, you could just graph it. So remember the absolute value bars, I might need to point this out to you before you take your test. You can find those in the math menu. And then you go over one sub-menu to number, a numerical rather. And then number 1 says ABS. That's how you can find absolute value. But you guys are so good at finding vertex. I don't know if you even have to do that. You remember that there's a built-in negative here. But outside of the groupings, there's no built-in negative. That's only happening in groupings, right? So your vertex is at +4, -3. Ooh, that was tricky. Almost got me. Ooh, that was tricky. Almost got me. It's this one right there. Factoring. You can use your factoring flowchart. This particular one is a common factor question. It will be multiple choice. That doesn't always make things easy. So in theory, you could take all your choices and distribute them back together. Just make sure you're choosing one that's factored completely. So when I look for a common factor in this problem, I look for coefficients and variables. They can both be divided by a 3, so that's definitely common. And they both have an x, so that's common. So out in front of our factoring group, we're going to have the factor of 3x taken out. And now I got to think about what's left once I take out a 3x. So 3x squared divided by 3x will leave you with just 1x. And then right here, whoops, -27x divided by 3x, well, the x's are gone. And you end up with a -9. So again, in order to check yourself, make sure you didn't do anything silly, if you were to redistribute it, you should get back to the original problem. So factoring is like really nice on a multiple choice exam because if you really don't know, you can just kind of distribute all the answers, I guess. Just make sure, again, it's factored completely. This is my favorite. Officially called the difference of squares, perfect squares. We refer to these as good twin, evil twin. So as long as you remember how the pattern works, it should be a real nice question for you. So in order to find the twin factors, you have to take the square root of each term. So the square root of 9x squared, the twin factors for 9x squared would be 3x and 3x. And then the twin factors, or the square root of 49, would be 7 and 7. And the way it works is you make one factor a positive and one factor a negative. Same idea as the complex conjugate that we used in the 4.8 complex numbers section. All right, why am I cutting off my own screen? Hold on. So these next few questions are all based on the same quadratic. So I don't think it would be a terrible idea to graph this on your calculator. Because if you're having a misconception on the first question, you probably are going to have it like on every question afterwards. Let me just see, Mr. Hardy gave you different questions. I know in the test it is the same quadratic over and over and over again. So again, graph it on your calculator, get a good feeling for what you're doing. Again, you guys are great at finding vertex because you always remember there's a built-in negative here in the parentheses. So that's really a -5. And then the +7 is not in parentheses, so it is literally a +7. So be careful, dyslexia, hello, not you, not you, not you, and it's you. Whew, that was nasty. All right, axis of symmetry. Again, it would have, on the test, it'll be based on the previous question. So you probably have a picture of it on your calculator. But the axis of symmetry on a parabola is the line that splices your parabola. Pretend that's in the middle. Splices your parabola directly in the middle. So it's always going to be found at x equals h because it's going to go through the vertex. So remember, your h value is the x value of your vertex. Remember, there's a built-in negative here. So your h is really a -3. So I'm going to be choosing x equals -3. Again, calculator is your friend on those questions. Please don't forget you have a calculator. Best question on the whole test. A parabola. Without even graphing it, we know it looks like this. So when I ask for domain, it's got arrows on the end, right? So this domain is going to go forever to the left and forever to the right. So the domain of every single parabola is going to be -infinity to infinity. I don't care what transformation happened to it, it's always going to be that. Range is not as simple because you can move your parabola up and down, you can reflect it. So again, I could use my graphing calculator. We'd find out that this parabola was shifted right 1, up 3. So, you know, it looks not like that at all, but pretend. So your range is going to start, in this case, it's going to start at the bottom of the parabola, which happens to be at the K value. That vertical shift is where the range starts when you have an up-opening parabola like this. So your range is going to start at 3 and then goes up to infinity. Make sure you recognize you have a bracket on this because there is a literal point right there at the ordered pair of 1, 3, which means we'd use a bracket. You're only going to use parentheses on infinities and open holes, which we don't have any open holes in this chapter. Oh, calculator time. So on our calculator, when I'm finding the max height of the arrow, we're going to want to graph it on our calculator, and I'm totally going to remember this. 80 and 5, huh? All right, give me a minute. So go to y equals, and this is going to be kind of nice because it's multiple choice. So I think at the very worst, you can probably eliminate some choices based on like just they don't make any sense. So I don't know. I think, oh no, Abruzzo type. Gosh, be golly, x squared. All right, plus 80x plus 5. So you should be able to eliminate just based on like logic. Now when I hit graph, I have a standard window right now and I can't even see the maximum height. So what I really need to do is adjust my window a bit. What I think is a great idea for some of you guys, because you do kind of struggle on this window part, always set your time to 0 to 10, which we can clearly see it hitting the ground, which we're going to need on the next question. You can even pull the time back a little bit if it bothers you. And if you're really struggling with the Y's, just try zoom fit. Zoom fit is the 10th one down, so you can type zoom 0. It's not a perfect window, guys, but you definitely can see the things you need to find, which is all you really need. It's kind of an ugly window, to be frank. If you wanted to adjust it, I always tell you guys to put your minimum height at -10, and then apparently 105 is a good height, so you could leave it like that. I think that's a beautiful window. All right, so second trace. If I'm finding the maximum height, I'm going to choose maximum, number 4. Whoops, 4. So left bound, remember, we're trying to find this guy up here. So left bound of him would be before the maximum occurred. You need to scooch way over. And you know what? Oh, they didn't ask me for time. I was going to say I could make a guess. Actually, forget that. I think I already know the answer. It's going to be really close to 105. Remember how our calculator zoomed fit and stopped our window at 105? So if there was a multiple choice question and one of the choices was close to 105 and none of the other ones were, I would stop doing this problem right now. I already know the answer. But, oh, look at that. It's 105. All right. So the second question says, when does it hit the ground? Or like how many seconds have elapsed before it hits the ground? Now, again, guys, you can find it on the calculator using your 0 finder. So left bound just means before it's underground, which right now I am. Right bound means underground. Boop, 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 boop. Oh, way underground now. So remember, that means 0. Don't freak out about that. It's 5.06. Now, I don't think I needed to do that. Remember, it's a multiple choice question. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's right around 5 seconds. There's only going to be one answer choice that's right around 5 seconds, and that would be the one I choose. So I would argue, I don't really know that you have to stress about this one. So we chose number 4 in the, I need to write some notes to my friends, second trace menu. Number 4, max. And then we went to second trace again, and we chose number 2, 0 for when it hit the ground. But just use your eyes, I guess, is my advice to you on that question. Don't freak out that you sometimes struggle with calculators, because we gotta think smarter, not harder, I guess is the point. Now this one says solve by factoring, and it was interesting because some of your classmates solve this using other methods. And here's the thing, it's a multiple choice test. I'm not grading your work. I don't care how you solve it. So if you love quadratic formula, go for it. If you love completing the square, go for it. I personally love factoring. So I'm going to go ahead and follow the instructions and factor it. So x times x would give us x squared. Now we jump to the end of our trinomial, and I think what times what will give me positive 24, and I need my arches to add up to negative 10. So I saw some of you fiddling on this question with a 12 and a 2, but your signs were wrong, so that's why you weren't getting it to work out. So x minus 6 times x minus 4 would be the correct factors. And then if you were to solve these factors, x minus 6 equals 0 is going to give you x equals 6. And then x minus 4 equals 0 is going to give you x equals 4. And they're both correct answers. Now, look how tricky Mr. Hardy is. And I was this tricky on the test as well. You notice here's the same solutions, but with the wrong signs. And right here is a very common factoring mistake, which is not correct. So do go slow on that question because it's so easy to mess up a factoring question just because you're stressed out. I know some of you don't feel like you're stressed out, but you are. So this one says to square root. And you know what? We're ready to square root right now. Let's do it. So square rooting a square, those are inverse operations and functions, so they cancel each other out. So x minus 3 equals, don't forget your positive and negative on this step. So remembering the plus or minus shows up in front of the square root. Now the square root of 12 is not a perfect square, but we do want to think about breaking that down. 12 does partially break down. Perfect square hiding inside of 12 is 4 times 3. So the square root of 4 is a 2, and then the square root of 3, we don't break down any further. So this is one of those cases where you're just going to add the 3 to the other side, but with this being multiple choice, you might not be able to control what the solutions look like. So this might be a choice, or they may have split it up using set brackets. So you might see this, 3 plus 2 square roots of 3, comma, 3 minus 2 square roots of 3. So sometimes you have the right answer on your paper, but it's not necessarily in the format as a choice. So you have to kind of open your eyes a little bit and get creative. All right, now this is a bit of a typo. It should say equals 0 to solve this using our quadratic formula. And I'll be honest, this one is much harder than the one that's on your test. So this one has a lot of reduction, including a complex solution. So your a value is the coefficient in front of your quadratic term. That'd be a 3. Your b value is the coefficient in front of your linear term. That would be a negative 8. And your c value is your constant, which in this case is a positive 7. So I'm going to give you the quadratic formula on the test. You don't have to memorize that. So now we just start filling it in. So it says opposite of b. So the opposite of your b term would be a positive 8. I like to write down a positive sign with that so I don't screw that part up. Square root of, now this is where many of you do make mistakes, b squared. So if I take negative 8 and I square it, if I don't use parentheses, I'm going to get the wrong answer. So I need to put parentheses around the negative 8 when I square it. Me personally, I just call that 64 and then I walk away from that part. I don't like to use parentheses, I guess is the story. So minus 4 times, here's a, and then times c7. And then all divided by 2 times a, which is 2 times 3. So when you break these down, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. When you break these down, we kind of have to partially simplify them. So I start with the discriminant, and I type the discriminant without the radical sign in my calculator. And this one, oh boy, I can't do that in my head. We're going to have to hold a calculator. So when you type that in the calculator with parentheses and everything, I know you get something negative. Turns out it's a negative 20. So you have 8 plus and minus the square root of negative 20 over 6. And on the final exam, this thing right here, this square root of the discriminant, is actually a really nice thing. It's like a perfect square. So you're going to have to take it down to the 2 answers. Now this one on the review is a little challenging because negative 20 breaks down very interestingly. It partially breaks down, and then it's also going to use an I. So this ends up being 8 plus and minus 2i square roots of 5. Again, much harder than what's on the test. Still over 6. And then again, this one, it still isn't done because you would have to come through then and divide 8, 2, and 6 by a 2. So 4 plus and minus, you can write a 1, but you don't have to. I squared to 5 over 3. That would be the solution set for this particular problem. But like I said, the one on the test, and I'm totally making this up, but it ends up doing something like this. So after all your work, you'll have, 5 plus and minus the square root of 36 over 2. Totally made that up, right? So in this case, you're going to have to separate because the square root of 36 is something beautiful. So you're going to have to do 5 plus 6, divide that by 2, make sure you use parentheses, and then you're going to have to do 5 minus 6 and divide that by 2. Again, make sure you use parentheses. So if you have this situation on your test, which you should, make sure you take it down to the 2 solutions. They're going to be 2 rational solutions. Oh, my favorite question. Remember that silly thing about that kid telling me to poke the eye out? Oh, guys, you got to poke the eye out. So when we break down negative 64, we're going to put 64 in the first radical because it is a perfect square. And normally I would tell you to keep the leftover at the end, but you know what? There's no leftover. So the square root of 64 is an 8, and the square root of negative 1 is an I. So the answer is 8i. No plus or minus on this problem. I get a lot of kids who try to throw a plus or minus in front of the solution, or the simplification of this. Because we don't have an equation, you can't just throw a plus or minus in front of anything you want. It's not how math works, unfortunately. All right, final 2 problems. Where they are, we are going to add our like terms together for these 2 complex numbers. So you're going to add your real numbers together and get a 9. And then you're going to add carefully your imaginary numbers together. So negative 7i plus 9i is a plus 2i. And that is the solution I'm looking for. Not the solution, but the simplification that I'm looking for. That is the answer. Multiplication is a little more exciting, though. You have to distribute. So 6 times 3 is 18, and you can multiply any types of numbers together that you want. So real times imaginary is something you can do. So 6 times negative 2i is negative 12i. And then here we got a plus 21i. And keep going. This is the one y'all keep messing up, so go slow here. 7i times negative 2i is a negative 14, and then I times I is going to be I squared. So there's a couple things we need to simplify here. These 2 terms right here combine. We can simplify these pretty easy. But I also have to remember what I squared is. I squared is the same thing as negative 1. So my problem really says 18, and then if I add these together I get plus 9i, and then I have a negative 14 times a negative 1. So clearly we need to multiply those together and get a positive 14. And then the fun isn't over, because now that you have a real number on the end and a real number at the beginning, you can add these real numbers together, and that's how you're going to get 32 plus 9i as your final answer. So again, these are really easy to mess up, so you want to go slowly. And I think that's the end of the review, guys. So that is one of every kind of thing you're going to see on the test. Nothing extra thrown at you, and I've given you a little bit of warning as to, trick questions and things to watch out for. The name of the game is to go slow. 30 questions. I just answered them all in, approximately 30 minutes. You guys are going to have 85 minutes to get this test done. So go slow.